As innocent children, we were exposed to something that changed our lives every year since elementary school. Older children even dreaded the thought of it, but now as adults, we don't have to deal with it. Those two words that made children cry when they heard it, and parents pray when their children said it. It even gives me the goosebumps when I think about it. State testing. Today, I will inform you about the No Child Left Behind Act, also known as the NCLB. This is important to all of us because as kids we were pressured by parents and teachers to do well on the test, and now we will learn why. It will also give us a better understanding when we have children of our own. Today, we will go back in time and explore the history of the NCLB Act. Then, we will find out how it actually works. And finally, we will uncover the arguments made by many parents, educators, and politicians. The history of the NCLB Act goes back to the late 1960s. According to Background and Analysis, published 2014, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, also known as the ESEA, was one of the first drafts of the No Child Left Behind Act. The ESEA was a law that gave federal funding to K-12 schooling, and their goal was to have more fundings and with schools of larger proportions of poor students. The ESEA had been changed 7 times, and it was most recently changed in 2002. According to the No Child Left Behind: Implications for College Student Learning, published 2011, the NCLB was proposed by President George W. Bush in January 2001, and President Bush signed it into law January 8, 2002. The now that we've seen a little bit of the history, let's go on ahead and let's look at how the actual act works. The NCLB Act works the same way for all of the United States, but the way that the states implement them is quite different. The NCLB requires that all public schools receive federal funding to administer statewide tests annually to the students. According to What Will Become of the NCLB, published 2015, students take a test under the same conditions all over the United States. Also, according to Balancing the Impact of the NCLB Act, published 2009, reading and math are tested annually, while science is only tested once in elementary school, middle school, and high school. Once the student takes the test, they are then compared nationally. The test scores are compared nationally, and the state is graded as a whole. And if the school fails to have an adequate yearly progress, also known as the AYP, it must have several changes. And the low-performing schools suffer even more changes and more consequences. Now that we've seen how the act works, let's go and uncover the arguments that many parents and educators have towards this act. There are a variety of arguments made towards the NCLB Act. The NCLB has been argued by many teachers, politicians, and parents. As cited earlier from What Will Become of the NCLB, the teachers teach to test, which means that the teachers only focus on the test and don't actually teach the rest of the subjects as equally because of fear of the school failing the AYP. Also, according to the CQ researcher on April 2010, as you can see from the chart, one of the main arguments is that the act hasn't really progressed the students. And as you can see from reading and math, since 1990 all the way to 2007, there hasn't been much of a progress, which was one of the main complaints. It's only progressed a little, not as much as many people hoped. Another argument is that schools will suffer unfairly by being labeled as failing when they're actually not. Remember when I talked about the test being compared? Well, the state gets a letter grade in the end, and they must pass a proficiency level. If the school doesn't pass, they suffer consequences. Although students might have failed or done poorly in the test the previous year and done really, really good the next year, the test doesn't really show that. The test just shows the school test scores as a whole. It doesn't show the student's achievement every year. It just shows the general testing scores. which is a big argument made by many teachers. Also, according to the New York Times, October 13, 2003, a college professor said, "Nobody can argue against the NCLB Act because how can you say that you would leave some children behind? But it is also nuts to say that it is possible for everyone to be the same." There are also some people that believe that the No Child Left Behind Act is a great idea. Some educators say that the bill holds schools accountable for better teachers, better quality, and the parents agree because then it will give their child a better education in their mind. The test also allows a series of choices for the parents and the children if the school fails to pass the AYP for a several amount of years. A few of the choices are that the student can get tutoring from the school, the parent can decide for the child to switch schools for a better school, one with a higher progress, and the student can also attend an after-school program. Today, we learned about the history of the NCLB Act. Then, I showed you how the NCLB Act works. And finally, we uncovered the arguments made by many teachers, educators, and politicians. Now you know why we were always pressured to do best on the test. And if you're still wondering if this act is still active, yes. Yes, it is.